What if the US dollar lost its crown as the world's leading currency? Could Donald Trump, with his bold threats of devastating tariffs, prevent such a monumental shift? And what would this mean for global trade as we know it? Today, we'll dive deep into Trump's warnings, the growing ambitions of the BRICS nations, and the potential ripple effects across the global economy. The US dollar has been the world's dominant reserve currency for decades, a position that grants the United States significant economic and political influence. However, this status is increasingly being challenged, particularly by the BRICS nations Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These countries have been exploring alternatives to the dollar for global trade and reserve holdings, which could dramatically reshape the financial landscape. Recently, former US President Donald Trump made headlines by threatening severe tariffs on BRICS nations if they decide to replace the dollar. His fiery rhetoric raises critical questions. Can he follow through on these threats? Would such measures be effective? And what would the consequences be for global trade? Why the US dollar's dominance matters? To understand the stakes, we first need to explore why the US dollar's role as the world's reserve currency is so significant. The dollar is used in about 88% of all international trade transactions. Oil and other commodities are priced in dollars, giving the US immense power over global markets. Countries holding dollars in their reserves are effectively tied to the American economy, creating a system where US policies, such as sanctions, have far-reaching consequences. For the US, this dominance allows for 1. Cheaper borrowing. Other countries buy US debt, which helps fund its deficits. 2. Economic leverage. The ability to impose sanctions by restricting access to the dollar-dominated financial system. 3. Trade advantage. The US can trade in its own currency without worrying about exchange rate fluctuations. If the dollar were replaced as the primary reserve currency, these advantages could weaken, and the US would lose a significant tool of global influence. The BRICS challenge. Replacing the dollar. The BRICS nations have long expressed frustration with the dollar-centric global system. They argue that it gives disproportionate power to the US and exposes their economies to external shocks. Recent developments suggest that BRICS is serious about challenging the dollar's dominance. 1. BRICS currency proposal. The group has floated the idea of creating a common currency for trade between member nations. 2. Bilateral agreements. Countries like China and Russia are increasingly trading in their own currencies instead of the dollar. 3. De-dollarization efforts. BRICS nations have increased their gold reserves and sought alternatives to dollar-based institutions like the International Monetary Fund, IMF. These moves aim to create a more multipolar financial system, reducing dependency on the dollar and, by extension, on US policies. Trump's threats. What did he say? Trump, never one to shy away from dramatic declarations, has threatened devastating tariffs on BRICS nations if they move forward with replacing the dollar. He argues that such actions would hurt American interests and undermine global stability. While Trump hasn't provided specific details about these tariffs, his track record suggests they could be substantial. During his presidency, he imposed sweeping tariffs on Chinese goods, triggering a trade war that affected global markets. The underlying message in Trump's rhetoric is clear: the US will not sit idly by while its economic dominance is challenged. Can Trump follow through? If re-elected, Trump could indeed implement tariffs on BRICS nations. Here's how. 1. Executive authority. The US president has broad powers under trade laws like Section 232, National Security, and Section 301, Unfair Trade Practices. 2. Precedent. Trump has already used tariffs extensively during his previous term, targeting not just rivals like China but also allies like the European Union and Canada. 3. Domestic support. Many Americans view tariffs as a way to protect domestic industries, which could bolster support for such measures. However, imposing tariffs on BRICS nations would be far more complex than targeting a single country. Challenges to implementing tariffs. 1. Economic retaliation. BRICS nations collectively represent a significant portion of global trade and production. Retaliatory tariffs could hurt US exports, particularly in industries like agriculture and technology. 2. Global supply chains. Many US companies rely on imports from BRICS countries, especially China and India. Tariffs could disrupt supply chains, leading to higher costs for businesses and consumers. 3. Legal constraints. While the president has considerable power, sweeping tariffs on multiple countries could face legal challenges, both domestically and internationally. How would tariffs impact global trade? If Trump were to impose tariffs, the effects on global trade could be profound. 1. Higher costs. Tariffs increase the cost of imported goods, leading to higher prices for consumers and businesses. This could dampen global economic growth. 2. Supply chain shifts. Companies may seek alternative suppliers outside BRICS nations, leading to a realignment of global supply chains. 3. Trade wars. Retaliatory measures by BRICS could spark broader trade conflicts, creating uncertainty in global markets. Ultimately, such a scenario could accelerate efforts to de-dollarize trade, as countries look for ways to reduce their vulnerability to U.S. economic policies. Would tariffs prevent de-dollarization? While tariffs might slow down the process, they are unlikely to stop the broader trend of de-dollarization. The BRICS nations have strong incentives to reduce their reliance on the dollar, including economic independence, avoiding the risk of U.S. sanctions and financial instability tied to the dollar. Strategic interests, strengthening their own currencies and institutions to increase global influence. Moreover, the global economy is increasingly multipolar, with countries like China and India emerging as major players. This shift makes a dollar-centric system less sustainable in the long run. What could the U.S. do instead? Rather than relying solely on tariffs, the U.S. could take other measures to maintain the dollar's dominance. 1. Strengthen economic alliances, deepen ties with allies to counterbalance the influence of BRICS. 2. Reform financial institutions, update institutions like the IMF and World Bank to address the concerns of emerging markets, making them less likely to seek alternatives. 3. Promote innovation, focus on maintaining economic and technological leadership, which underpins the dollar's strength. These strategies would require a long-term, collaborative approach rather than unilateral action, a battle for economic power. The threat of devastating tariffs highlights the growing tensions between the US and BRICS as they vie for economic influence. While Trump's threats are bold, the challenge posed by BRICS is not easily addressed through tariffs alone. The global economy stands at a crossroads. Whether the dollar retains its dominance or a new financial order emerges, the decisions made in the coming years will shape the future of international trade and power dynamics. What do you think? Can Trump's threats preserve the dollar's status, or are we witnessing the dawn of a new economic era? Share your thoughts in the comments below.